Alright, in this video we're going to go ahead and get our users administrative area kind of scaffolded in. We're not actually going to be using any or working against a real database quite yet, but that's going to be the subject of our next video. I just wanted to get the routes and the views out of the way for two of the pages that we're going to need, the create user page and the list user page. So I'm going to implement our users as an area. So I'm going to right-click buzzmmo.web, go to add area, I'm going to call it admin. An area in ASP.NET MVC is really just a place to put related controllers and views. And you'll notice that areas have their own distinct routes. So you'll notice that all of the routes in the admin area are prefixed with admin/. Also, there's a thunderstorm outside and the power flickered, so if I die, then don't worry about me. Or worry about me. I don't know, whichever way you want to go. So we have controllers, models, and views. We also have a shared folder. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a user controller, or users controller, and then I'm going to create a master file, or master layout for my admin area, and I'm going to create two views. So under controllers, I'm going to add a class called users controller. He's going to inherit from controller. He's going to have two methods, one public action result index to list all the users, and one public action result create to create a user. I'm also going to create a third action result create with the HTTP post attribute, because this is the action that's going to be invoked when our create user form is submitted to the server. Now you notice I haven't filled in the returns yet, nor have I filled in the parameters yet. That's because I have to create the view models that correspond to these two actions. So since I have the index and the create actions, I'm going to create two view models, one called users index and the other one called users create, just like I created the home index view model for my other controller. To create the view models, I'm going to rename the models folder inside of my admin area to view models, and I'm going to create a class called users index, and I'm going to create a class called users create. Now, users index for now will be empty because we don't have anything to put in there quite yet, but users create, I will put all the values that I want to be present on the form. So I want public string username, public string password, public string email. Next up, I'm going to decorate these properties with different attributes that will tell ASP.NET MVC about what I expect from these properties. So username will be required, and that's it, really, actually. Password will be required, and it'll have a data type of data type.password. Email will be required and have a data type of data type.email address. So now that I have my users create class and my users index class, I can finish my users controller class by having my index method simply return view new users index. Now, of course, what I just did brought in the using BuzzMMO web areas admin view models at the top. My create method will simply return view new users create. And then my other create method is actually going to take in a users create parameter called form. It's simply going to return view of form. So that's my basic users controller. We'll fill this in once we have our data abstraction layer hooked up so that we can actually manipulate some data. Now I need to create my views. So before I create my views, just like what we did with our other views for our front end, I'm going to create a layout file and a view start file. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste these. So I'm going to copy layout.cshtml into views shared, and I'm going to copy view start.cshtml into views, so that we have view start right here and we have shared right here, or shared layout right here. Now the view start method is going to use a different layout. The view start method right here, or view start file right here, you see points to the front end layout. I don't want that. I want to do areas, admin, views, shared, layout. So areas admin view share layout is going to be the layout that's used for all the admin views. The next thing I want to do on view shared layout is I want to change the styles that we render. Instead of rendering styles front end, I want to render styles back end. We'll create that bundle here in a moment. Now that I have my, well, also I will change the title to buzzmmo.admin to make it a little bit more clear that we're in the admin. Next up, I'm going to create a folder under views called users. Under users, I'm going to create two Razor MVC views, one called index, which is going to take in a model of users index. Now you'll notice that it auto-completed that to buzzmmo.web.areas.admin.viewModels.usersIndex because that's the fully qualified path to this type. Everything else I'm going to remove, and then I'm going to simply do users index up here as my h1. Then I'm also going to add in a HTML.action link to create, and then I'll need to pass in my route values, which I'll have none of, and then my HTML attributes. My HTML attributes is going to be class equals btn small btn default. These are bootstrap classes that'll make this look like a button. So now that I made a link from my user's index to my create user, I'm going to go ahead and create another Razor file, Razor MVC view, and I'm going to call it create. It's going to have a model of users create, which again is going to autocomplete to buzzmmo web areas admin view models, and then I'm going to remove all the other code from it. Now in here, this is where we can get fancy with some of bootstrap stuff. If we went to components and then went into and checked out the, see, they moved around all of, there we go. Go into forms, we can just use this really basic kind of template to make a form for our user that looks kind of decent. So basically that's what I'm going to be basing this code that's coming up here on. So I'm going to say HTML.begin form, or sorry, using HTML begin form, and then I'm going to put in div class form group. Inside of form group, I'm going to do label, or sorry, HTML.label4. F goes into username. I'm going to say HTML.editor4. F username. Div class form group. I'm going to do, oh, come on visuals, you can do better than that. Label4, f.password, HTML editor 4, f.password, and then I'm going to do another div class form group, HTML.label4, f.email, HTML editor 4, f.email. Then for my submit button, I'm going to simply do something like, let's do input type equals submit, value equals create user. For his classes, I'm going to say button, button default, button small, and then I'm going to say or, well, which is not going to let me do that because I'm not in a, let's open up a p tag. Razor sometimes gets a little finicky. I'll say or HTML.action link, go back, and that'll point to index. Okay, so I've created my form for my users. Pretty straightforward.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So I'll hit F6 to compile. I'll hit Control F5 to run. And then I'll clear out that. So I'm just going to this path. And then I'm going to go to admin/users. Now I have a create user. Ooh, I accidentally snuck in a semicolon there. That's because I do that sometimes on accident. In Razor, if you're doing a Razor expression like this, you do not need a semicolon. Otherwise, it'll appear inside of the HTML itself. So I can say create user, and then I can create the user, or I can click go back. I might also want to add an H1 in the create user form somewhere that says H1 create user, so that it looks like this now, which makes it a little bit more nicer. Now you notice that we're not getting any styles. And we're not getting any styles because we never created our bundle, and we've never brought in we've never created a new less file for our admin. So I'm going to go ahead and, for now, I'm actually going to use the same less file that we have already, our application.less, so that I can share the styles between the admin and the front end. I might change that in the future, I don't know, but I can always, I can always change that however I want by just editing my bundle config. So for now, I'm just going to simply copy and paste this, and instead of front-end styles, we'll have back-end styles, and I'm just going to literally replace every instance of front-end styles here. The only change I'm going to make is the name or the virtual path to the bundle is going to be backend, which, if you recall, was what I specified in my layout file right here for my admin. So again, all I did was copy and paste my front-end style configuration and did back-end styles, and all that stuff's good. Now, in order to see this change, I have to hit Control F6, or sorry, just F6, and then come back here and hit refresh. And we should see our typography changing. As you see, that's now red, and our create user button is now a button. We come in here and we have a bit of a form. It doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't look great either. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to move this out of the way, go into my admin layout. This really bugs me. I'm going to say div class container. By wrapping our body in a class called container, Bootstrap will automatically center our form with a fixed width and allow it to get smaller depending on the size of our browser window, which is pretty cool. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my content application.less, and I'm going to remove my rule on the H1 because I don't want those to be red anymore. Okay, so I did just realize one thing. You can get this to work, these form styles. Now, in Bootstrap, these should have been styled a little bit differently than what you see right here. The reason they're not is because I haven't applied a particular class to them in the create file. Unfortunately, the editor for extension method will display a different editor depending on the data type of what we passed in, but you can't override the class that it uses, the CSS class that it uses. Meaning, in order to set our CSS classes of our inputs to the form control class, which we need to do in order for it to appear correctly with Bootstrap, we will have to use different extension methods other than editor for. The one I'm going to use here is textbox4, which will allow me to pass in a object of HTML attributes. So now I can say new class equals form control. For the password, I'm going to say password4 and do the same thing. New class equals form control. And for email, I'm simply going to do textbox4 passing in new class equals form control. If we come back here and refresh, we now have this form. So next up, let's do some validation. So what I want to do is at the top of our form, I want to say html.validation summary, or just validation summary. Come back here and say create user, and now we get validation messages at the top telling us that these values were required. I can pass in data, and you notice they'll go away. Of course, the password doesn't persist between different invocations. So now we have some validation, server-side validation. It's being presented to us. I'm not going to worry about client-side validation. I'm not going to worry about styling this any more than I have, because I think that as far as a style, this is perfectly acceptable for what we want to accomplish. I will, however, say that it is going to be a little problematic, because if we go to straight up admin, you'll notice we get a 404. That's because we don't have any admin landing page. Furthermore, we're going to be adding more admin systems than just the users index. So what I need to do is add a top bar that'll allow us to navigate between the different systems. So let's go ahead and create the admin landing page. I'm going to close out all my documents, and I'm going to open up my admin area registration. You'll notice my admin area registration does not supply a default value for controller. That means that currently no route that we have in this area is ever going to match on just admin /. Also, that's capitalized and I don't like it capitalized. So I'm going to change that to lowercase admin. But that's irrelevant. I mean, that's, cosmetic. It's not going to make a functional difference.
Neither here nor there.
Right. But what I am going to do is I am going to specify a default controller of home. That way, our admin area, when we go to straight up admin, will default to home index. This will introduce a problem, by the way. We'll have a conflict with our home controller on our front end, but we'll resolve that in a moment. So in my controllers namespace, I'm going to add a new class called home controller. It's going to inherit from controller. It's going to have a public AR action result index method that simply returns view. I'll go ahead and create a view model for it too, even though I'm not going to populate it with anything just yet. But I really do like creating these view models while I'm thinking about it, because sometimes you forget and then it gets annoying. So now we can go ahead and plop in any data we want into home index that we might want to pass into our view. So again, all I did was create a class called home index, and on home controller I passed a new home index into it. Now let's create the corresponding view. I'm going to enter views. I'm going to say home. I'm going to create a new Razor MVC with layout, and I'm going to call it index. The model is going to be home index. Now you'll notice I get two options here. One for the one that's in the area's admin, one for that isn't. I want to do the area admin one. And then I'm going to nuke all of this code inside of here and replace it with admin home. Welcome. Make it friendly. So now if I hit just F6, and I come back here and I try to type in just admin, you'll notice something wrong. It won't go to the correct... Oh, really? They finally fixed that? After all these years, they finally fixed that.
And just to get you.
Yeah, just to make me look stupid. That's the only reason why they did that. They all got together one day and was like, you know what, Nelson's going to be upgrading from MVC4 to MVC5, and he's going to want to demonstrate this problem that's been in MVC since MVC2, and then we're going to make it so it works instead, so it'll just... Actually, it might not work. Yeah, there we go. The admin worked, this side didn't. Thank you, Microsoft, for not fixing this annoying problem so that I didn't look entirely stupid, even though I just spent the last 2 minutes looking dumb. All right. Well,
and having a mild meltdown.
That's all right. Anyway, the errors still persist. The problem is that we have an ambiguous home controller. It doesn't know if we want to, on our normal index page, our normal home page, it doesn't know if we want to pull in the home controller from our admin area, or the home controller from our not admin. To fix this, it's actually fairly simple. Let's go into our app start, route config, and let's take a look at the map route function. First of all, I'm going to remove all these named parameters. These named parameters are redundant. I find them ugly and I hate them and I wish they went away, which I just made happen all by myself. Okay, so let's look at the signature of this method. We pass in the name of the route, we pass in the URL of the route, we pass in the defaults of the route, we pass in the constraints of the route, And we can also pass in a string array of the namespaces that the controllers that we want this route to match in as a string array. That was a redundant, horribly constructed sentence. But what it means is if we pass in buzzmmo.web.controllers into this method, then it will only search for controllers in that namespace, which will remove the ambiguity and make this error disappear. So let's go ahead and do that. Because we'll need to do this for every single route that we map in route config, I'm going to say var namespaces equals new string array, and I'm going to pass in buzzmmo.web.controllers, and all I'm going to do is simply tack this on. Let's go full screen so you can see this whole line. I'm just going to tack this on to the end of our map route method, or map route invocation in our route config file. This way, when I hit F6 to recompile and come back here to my browser, there's no longer an ambiguity. We can also jump into admin. Alright, so that's pretty cool. But we now need to create navigation in our admin so that we can link to the user's admin from the admin dashboard.
All right, let's go.
So let's go into areas, shared, and let's go ahead and add some awesome bootstrap magic that I completely forgot the syntax of. So hold on while I look up the documentation. By the way, the documentation is very important to get a handle on. I mean, still, reading through the documentation is still 1,000 times faster than writing this stuff on your own. So I'm just going to jump to the navbar documentation, which is under the components. And I'm going to look at their sample code. And that's a lot of code. I don't know if I like that. A lot of code. Whatever. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go basically just copying over from Bootstrap's documentation. So we'll do a nav element with a class of navbar and navbar default. We'll do a div class container fluid. Come on, work. Inside of container fluid, we'll want our div class navbar header. Inside of our navbar header, what do we want?
Ice cream?
No.
Oh.
Oh, this is a yeah, I don't really care about this.
Okay.
I just realized, what am I doing? This is the responsive layout navbar, which we don't care about responsiveness with. When I say responsiveness, I mean the layout of the page changing depending on how wide your screen is. We don't want that. That would just be a waste of time to implement. So instead, I'm just going to say ul class navbar nav with an li and then an HTML.action link home going to index home li HTML action link users index users. So again, this the third parameter is the controller, the second parameter is the action, and the first parameter is the name of the link. So if we do that, we should get a nice little bar up here that allows us to navigate between the two things. Now, unfortunately, that's alright. So what we need to do is we need to wrap this in a navbar, and we also need to wrap this in a container so that these nav links follow along with us, or follow along with the size of our browser. To do that, I'm just going to do class or div with a class of navbar. And navbar default, and then inside of here I'll do a div class equals container, and the container will make sure that it stays parallel to our content. And what do we get? We get a nice little navbar. So now we can move to users index, or we can go to the admin home.
Nice.
I know everybody's going to hate me for doing this, but that margin bottom on that navbar is really annoying me. So I'm going to go ahead and override that. So I'm going to grab that class. I'm going to go into content styles application.less. I'm going to write a selector that selects this. And I'm going to say margin bottom equals 0. Come back here, refresh, and that looks a whole lot nicer. All right, so with relatively little work, we now have a basic placeholder for our users. Of course, we'll be adding in a table here so we can actually view our users and be able to delete users and edit users and all that fun stuff, but that's for a later time. Next up on our list is to actually go ahead and import, get some data working with this. We're going to be using Entity Framework to do that, and it's going to allow us to easily write code that integrates with our database that we'll be able to reuse between our website and our Photon server. Now, if you guys are worried that we're going to be using an ORM for the real-time aspect of the game, don't, because although there are a lot of transactional things in a game, such as a person at an auction house or a person logging in or creating a character, that's all fine to use an ORM for, but for things like saving the position of a player as they're moving around the world, you would want to be as close to SQL as possible. So we're actually going to be using two separate data access layers. One high-level one for transactional stuff where the performance doesn't matter as much, and one low-level one for high-performance code. Anyway, we'll get into that in the next video, so we'll see you guys then.
Take care.